was one of mankind's greatest discoveries. However, it was not enough for our ancient ancestors to simply discover the fact that fire existed. They had to learn how to harness the power of fire. Otherwise, it would be useless or destructive. I'm here today to suggest that our civilization has just made another life-altering discovery called stress, specifically the stress we experience at work. And I think it is destined to change the way we live, just like fire did. But because we haven't figured out how to harness the power of stress, we're in this phase of seeing it as useless and destructive, and we burn out. As a chief happiness officer, I've seen firsthand the destruction caused by excessive stress. 2 out of every 3 full-time employees experience some form of burnout, and up to even 90% of disease is caused by excessive stress. This is because stress is not just a feeling. It is a physical state when the body fires itself up for action with fight or flight hormones that act kind of like a primal coffee. And just like we can burn out from too much coffee, we can burn out from too much stress. Burnout gives stress its bad name, but stress has a good side. The famous psychologist Mihai Csikszentmihalyi discovered that stress is an important ingredient in the recipe for flow, which is this high performance experience we have where time disappears and we become immersed in the work that we're doing. And this is one of the most blissful states we can be in. An example of how stress keeps us healthy in the right amount is seen every day when we get a little irritable because we're hungry. We're irritable not just because we're low on glucose, but because stress hormones get released to counter-regulate low glucose levels. Generally speaking, for millions of years, stress helped our ancient ancestors push through the roughest and the toughest times, and yet they were not suffering from the plethora of stress-related diseases that we see today. What changed? This question was especially important to me because before I was a chief happiness officer, I burned out and I became very sick and depressed. I used my background in science to start to research everything from neuroscience to positive psychology to behavioral science. And I was surprised to find that there is a science, not just behind stress management, but specifically happiness. This information so profoundly helped me that it inspired me to be a chief happiness officer. This research is relatively new. It has not been around long enough to trickle in to the curriculum at most of our schools. I know I didn't learn it. And yet the takeaways are some of the most life-changing and beneficial that any of us could ever learn. And for that reason, I wish I could download everything to you today, but we only have a few minutes. So if I were to boil down all of the science into one big idea that I would hope you would remember even years from now, it would be this: you have an incredible potential to be happy, even when it feels impossible. And if you can tap into that hidden happiness, you will make stress your superpower. I would want you to remember this because happiness is the last thing on people's minds during times of stress. It might even seem airy-fairy, counterproductive, or naive. And I'm not talking about forcing yourself to feel good or pretending like problems don't exist. That's not how I'm defining happiness. Authentic happiness conditions your brain and even changes its structure so that you can stay a clear-minded problem solver to find crucial solutions in stressful times. This is because authentic happiness activates and even strengthens a very special part of your brain that helps you to control emotions and exercise willpower, called the prefrontal cortex. What makes us authentically happy? Well, this is the fun part. Science shows these are things like performing acts of kindness, expressing gratitude, and practicing mindfulness, which is a fancy way of saying you're able to focus on the present moment even when your mind wants to run somewhere else. It's so important to be able to control our emotions because Dr. Daniel Goleman, the author of Emotional Intelligence, explains that stress by design turns off your logical thinking brain. And that means you can't access your intelligence during stressful times, but you can condition yourself through happiness so that when you get this huge surge of instinctive energy from stress, you can change all of that into something productive and constructive. Harvard happiness researcher Sean Acor finds that happy people are up to 31% more productive. Happy salespeople outsell by 37%, and even happy doctors diagnose their patients more quickly and more accurately. We have a big problem, though. Our society has become very centered on addictive happiness. Addictive happiness still feels really good, but it does not empower your brain in the same way. Several scientific studies show that there are rising levels of addictions to things like smartphones and social media, and these are very real. The University of Gothenburg found that this excessive time we spend in front of screens actually increases stress levels and makes it more likely that we'll be depressed. So we think we're de-stressing at the end of the day, and we're not. This is one of the ways that addictive happiness tricks us, and we end up so quickly on the road to burnout. Essentially, in our modern world, we have to relearn how to be happy. And the best way to do this is to exercise happiness like a muscle. The good news is that happiness can be learned. Science helps us to know how to learn it, and up to 40% of our happiness is in our control. It's so important to grow your happiness muscles, as I call them, because not only do we have this underactive ability to be happy, but we have this overreactive stress instinct that is constantly overreacting in our pampered modern world. And this is especially true at work. Teams are responding to rushed projects and even office drama physically as if they were in the African Serengeti. And because stress is so sneaky, a lot of times we don't know that we're stressed out in the beginning. We feel things like anger, irritation, sadness, frustration, and those emotions in themselves aren't bad. But because we don't recognize that this is stress in disguise, when we don't bounce back from it, that's what leads to burnout and depression. This is why work is one of the best places to start exercising your happiness muscles. And when teams do this, it wakes up all of this sleeping talent that has been suppressed by stress. And a lot of times workplaces are very stress-based, not because of the problems themselves, but because of how people react to those problems. And building a culture centered on happiness can be very simple. It doesn't have to be complicated. It just needs to be consistent. So going back to those 3 examples, if we were to apply those at work, let's say you get up to get a coffee for yourself. You can exercise kindness and grab a coffee for a colleague. You're in the middle of checking emails. You can send a quick thank you to someone, expressing gratitude for their help on a project. Let's say you're running around, it's a busy day. If you take 1 minute and look out the window and just appreciate the present moment, you've exercised mindfulness. This is just the beginning of a long list of things you can do to build your happiness muscles. And if you're persistent, over time, you'll build these huge, gigantic Arnold Schwarzenegger-sized happiness muscles that will help you handle the heat of stress without getting burned, and you'll make stress your superpower. Because we can't control the people or the circumstances that stress us out. We can only condition ourselves to react. And the beautiful thing is, when we do this, we'll rediscover our authentic happiness. And I think that the next great discovery of civilization will be self-discovery and learning to harness the power of your fire within. Thank you.